good morning, everybody, and welcome to another show. And thanks for giving us your time, and hopefully we will reciprocate that with something useful and a shot in the arm. So just before I get going, actually, just a note on the mentoring scheme, Mentoring Gen Z. Many of you will have seen that. Marketing Week kindly gave us a launch communication earlier in the week, and so far really good. We've had a ton of people come forward as mentors. Let us know if you are interested. We've also had a couple hundred people register as mentees, and that's the bit we're now focused on. But actually, we've got a really good bank of mentors, including today's guest. So what you could do now is, if there's people you think benefit from mentoring, maybe more junior people in your team, people you know, friends, relatives, who knows. But we want to build that bank of mentees. It's a tricky one, building this exchange, supply and demand. So that's where you could help us. But anyway, that's a side note on mentoring. On to the main event of the show. So, well, we've had Blue Monday, the most depressing day of the year, on the 18th. So that's a reason to be optimistic in these slightly tricky times. Also, I'm a bit obsessive about the length of daylight these days. There's this little app you can get, and it's good to know that the length of day today is about 50 minutes longer than January the 1st. So there's another reason to be optimistic. But the most important reason to be optimistic is that we have another fabulous guest. So I'd like to introduce Margaret Jobling, who many of you will know. So Marg's going to switch camera on now. We're sort of trying out this green room thing. But welcome to the show, Marg. Great to have you on. Fantastic to have you with us.
Morning, all. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, so it's a special treat today. So Marg is, without doubt, one of the most experienced marketers in the UK. And if I get this right, she's been in many sectors, worked at Unilever, Sara Lee, Cadbury, Birdseye, British Gas, and Centrica, and now at NatWest. So she's moved around many sectors. I think there's a did you know would be, I think I'm right in saying that, Marg, you delivered the first ever global Lynx campaign, which is obviously particularly noteworthy and very famous campaign. But most recently, Marg has started a new job. Two noteworthy things, one in lockdown, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So how to start a massive new job virtually. And also, NatWest had reversed out from having a CMO and then switched that back on. So I'm sure there's some interesting things there. But I think the biggest thing I could say about Marg is she's one of the most humble and kind and easy to talk to people. So I think we're going to have a lovely experience today. But equally, razor sharp. You don't get to where she's got to without having some smarts and also having some influence. So it's a fantastic treat for us all to have you on the show, Marg. I'm really pleased to have you here. And I'll hand over to Richie to get us started with questions.
Hey, thank you very much, Mark. And Mark, what a pleasure to have you on this morning. Really great to see you. I know we connected a couple of years ago, and so it's great to be reconnected again through the show. Mark, you have literally started probably one of the most powerful jobs that sort of, probably happened in lockdown. Please tell us a little bit about that, your transition to NatWest Group, of course, the rebranding as well, which I think maybe happened just before you got into the hot seat. But love to hear a little bit more about that transition. How did you get yourself into that position during these times?
It was weird, to be fair. I think if you had said to me beginning of last year, you're going to go through a whole interview process, you're going to not meet anyone, you're going to sign up for a job, you're going to start working in that job, not meet anyone for probably about a year, I would have laughed and said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Anyway, I did. And it was interesting. I would say the interview process was the fastest interview process I've ever had, because actually the joy of lockdown is it's really easy to schedule meetings at the beginning and the end of the day. So you didn't have the whole, well, I'm only in London next Tuesday and I'll come in at 6 o'clock. So I think I had 9 interviews in about 4 weeks with an assessment chucked in, which was phenomenal. I mean, you can whip through a process. It is interesting. You can get a real sense of people and culture. And I think there's something, and someone said it to me, you only see the top of somebody's face and body, but you're actually quite close. And if you think in the office, you don't sit that close to someone, so you're sort of face to face. So the interview process was interesting and quick. I think starting, it's been a mixed bag. I mean, you get to meet a lot of people very quickly. I think relationship building is probably the toughest bit, because you miss a lot of the texture, I would say, the body language, the cues. It took me a while to work out he doesn't like him or she doesn't get on with him, or, what the piece, it is texture, that's how I describe it. But, I'm now, 5 months in, and find my feet and I was just in the keep calm and carry on. We're in lockdown for a while. Now, you can get a lot done And the bit I'm working on is how do you get the spontaneous connection? I think you miss the, the coffee machine conversation, the texture, the sidebar. So you have to work a bit harder, I think, when you're new to try and get a real sense of what's going on. But it's going well. I'm learning about the business and enjoying it. So it's not so bad.
Good, and always with a smile on your face, Mark, which I think is is an important thing. We'll talk a bit more about your current challenges, but let's rewind a little bit. When I did start digging into and doing a bit of research, the first thing that flashed up on LinkedIn is that you also studied with Marg at Nottingham University in 1992. So there you go. But you did a proper degree. You got a PhD in laser chemistry. How the hell did you end up in marketing?
Oh my God. So, my backstory is I'm from a really rough council estate in Sunderland. One of three, and no one in my family's ever gone to uni, but I was some like little freak who I just loved school, loved maths, loved chemistry. My two brothers just, the local school would have a fight and my brothers would be leading with a chair leg in their hand. So I was this weird little swatty girl. And I ended up, my mum, there's a point to this, by the way. My mum used to be a cleaner. She used to clean for the local Catholic school. And she managed to get me a place to do my A-levels at this Catholic school, all girls, because my school stopped at 16. It was like, girls do needlework and cookery. They don't do science. So went to Catholic school, did chemistry, maths and physics for A-level. And everyone at that school was going to university. And at that point, it wasn't even a consideration. Anyway, long story short, love maths, loves chemistry, ended up going to uni, did a maths and chemistry degree, ended up living with five guys who had, they were doing chem eng or medicine, so longer degrees than me. And I was like, do you know what? I'm going to do a PhD, delay the agony of work. So 3 years studied, got offered a job by Unilever, started as a research scientist. So I was literally specs, white coat, on the bench, mixing stuff up. And I got asked to do a special project. So they coupled a marketeer with a research scientist. And it was, can you increase the cycle time of innovation to market? So I was mixing stuff up. She was creating concepts. We were testing them. So now you'd call it co-creation. But back in the day, it was like some really magic thing we were doing. And I loved it. I just loved it. So I said, I want to go into marketing, put my hand up, and everybody went, no. Do you know what? Technical people are not very creative. So you're better off staying in technology because actually, you don't get it. It's this art and it's, you techies, you don't know what you're talking about. And it literally took me a long time. So talked to lots of people in that business. And, there was a lady in there, chem eng, who was running the biggest piece of marketing for Unilever, said, do you know what? I'll give you a shot. I look back, I think she was crazy, to be honest. She put me into a senior brand manager role in Unilever, looking after Dove UK. I was Dove deodorant for the UK. So I was P&L accountable for the UK. I was a European brand manager because we had UK and Europe as one. So running the innovation advertising for Europe for Dove, which we were trying to roll out deodorant at the time, which was the golden goose. Dove was the golden goose of Unilever. And she was going, here you go, off you go. And I literally knew nothing. I look back and I laugh and I go, do you know what? She gave me the biggest break ever. But, would it happen today? I'm not sure it would, to be honest. I think it's harder for people to take a punt on someone. So that's how I ended up in marketing. So techie my background and then got into, the world of marketing.
Mark, wow. I mean, what a foundation and, I guess a baptism of fire in so many ways. But clearly you've sailed and how. What's fascinated me about, your transition from those early days all the way through to where you are now is that you've actually moved through different sectors. And I find that quite fascinating because talk about being pigeonholed, one being transition into marketing, but then being able to move into different industries in the marketing sort of capacity is something which is another big barrier in today's sort of world. How did you convince people that that's possible? I think this is your first foray into financial services, if I'm not mistaken.
First financial service, so sort of second foray into regulated business. So I would say most of my career, so I spent 15 years in Unilever, consumer goods, then went into, as you said, Sara Lee, Cadbury, Birdseye, but all consumer goods. My first foray into service was I went utilities, so British Gas, and that was actually quite a big transition and not because marketing's different across this. What we do is consistent. We try to get people to love our products and services and take more from us. At its basic level. But the way marketing is positioned in each of those companies is very different. So if I think of consumer goods, I would say marketing's much more at the heartbeat of the organisation, because your big problem in FMCG is you've got to get retailers to put your products on shelves, and you've got to get customers to go into the retail and buy that product off the shelf. So your entire, I guess, supply chain in marketing is geared around understanding the customer, really creating products and services that they want, and then advertising them in a way that really emotionally resonates. So marketing is actually the heartbeat of, Unilever. I think what I found once I moved into some of the service businesses is it literally is, and it's moved, but I very much was seen as the colouring in department. So marketing was seen as the advertising, and actually this notion of brand is everything. Brand is, in British Gas, it's every engineer visit, it's every telephone call, it's every bill we send out, actually, and it's the comms. It wasn't really a concept that the business understood. So I think what I found once I moved out of consumer goods is the first question you've got to ask when you get to some of these businesses is, what is marketing? What are we here to do? And how do we connect some of the pieces that the business don't naturally connect? And that's been my biggest learning into services. So utilities was all about, understanding how do we get the brand, much bigger than just the comms, but also understanding the regulator landscape. That was tough. I think I went from being, as I called it, unconsciously incompetent to eventually being consciously competent to figure out, the regulator, the language of regulation was a whole new world to me. And then now we've just moved into FS. FS is more like utilities, but with a whole language of the business. I mean, I've literally, in my first 6 months, I've read documents and thought, I don't actually know what it says. So I've had to read it again and thought, I still don't know what it really says. So we've created a language, and I keep saying, banking's not that complicated, is it? Like people put money in the bank, we invest that money, and then people take money out of the bank. It's not, but that's not how we talk about the business. So getting your head around that is really important as a marketeer.
So Mark, so interesting for you to talk about the differences between consumer goods and services. It's very resonant for me as well. And you end up being an evangelist, an educator, a teacher. And I'll just tell one tiny story, which was about a year ago, somebody rotated into marketing from the procurement function on the graduate scheme. And I asked him, how did he feel about moving into marketing? And he said, well, I'll be really honest with you, I was quite nervous because back in the day at school, I was actually rubbish at drawing. So there we go. I mean, it's there is an education job to do, but sort of a twist on that. Obviously, we've launched this mentoring scheme as a way to sort of help Gen Z. What role has mentoring played in your career, either as a mentor or as a mentee?
I've experienced both ends of the spectrum, to be honest. I found mentor relationships really helpful. I guess I've never had a long-term mentor. I've always gone, there's points in your career where I think it's really useful and to have someone who actually, and outside of your day-to-day, whether it's line management but you can use to bounce things off and, gain wisdom from and think about things differently. Actually, one of the best mentors I had was someone who was running global audit. And you think, gosh, a marketeer and a finance guy. But actually, the way he thought about things was so completely different from me. So what I got a lot was perspective. Actually, the world and the lens and throughout which I see the world was very different from him. So I found that really useful. Actually, I've got as much, if not more, from mentoring. So I think every single person I've ever mentored, I've learned things from, because, particularly as you get older, not that I'm an old lady yet, but, I just think I see people developing in their career and actually experimenting. And I think you can always learn. Our work is never done. Everybody brings something to the party, and I think we can learn from each other. I think it's hugely valuable. But it's all about the relationship. You've got to gel, and that's the other piece. Is I've found you've got to find, the vibe works between the two people, and then I think you can get a lot out of the mentor and mentee relationship.
Awesome. Well, Mark, you may be pleased to hear that we've got quite a few bankers, or marketer bankers, should I say, on the channel this morning. In fact, we've got the ex-chairman of Clydesdale Bank actually listening in as well at the moment. So great to have you on there, John, to learn perhaps about some of your perspectives around it. But I'd like to get a sense from you, maybe taking you back to some of your early days, about your motivations and what perhaps some of your inspirations that were able to really take you through your career.
I mean, I've never had a big game plan. So it wasn't like I wanted to be a marketeer, or I've always sort of, I look at life and I go, stuff happens and you go left or right. And as you go left or right, opportunities unfold. And, the thing that's always motivated me is doing a good job. Actually, I'm really driven by seeing and making a difference, which sounds a bit cheesy, but, and actually marketing, I think, is common sense. I love people. I love seeing stuff happen. I love, seeing the ad on air or seeing the product on the shelf. So I love creating stuff. And what's always motivated me is doing a really good job and getting, making things better. So, getting the product out the door. And my biggest own self-improvement program. So I'm always looking at it going, okay, what could I do better? Why did that not quite go as it is? And, I've got some howlers. I mean, but the thing with, even when you get it wrong, you've got to be able to look at it and say, I know where that went wrong. And actually, if I went and did that again, I'd do something quite different.
Now that you said it, Mark, you're going to have to tell us some of the things that went wrong. Give us some howlers.
I've got campaigns that never saw the light of day. I used to get really nervous. You went up, less so now, but when you saw that first edit, I remember back in the day, because a lot of the production process is around, you think you've got a shared vision for something and what pops out that food mixer. We used to always have the eternal debate in Unilever. Do you go on a shoot? Do you not go on a shoot? Do you let the agency, that's the handoff and off they go. Are you better off on a shoot and you can, manage what goes on? No, I've had a whole Lynx campaign that we never got out the door. I remember sitting in the first edit meeting thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then spent many weeks polishing what ultimately never became the silk purse and having to go, it's not good enough. And you're looking, so then you're going back to the business to say, I've just spanked quite a few £100,000s and can't use the material. I've had big, massive projects that we spent lots of money on that never managed to get launched, but from each of it, you just got to look back and say, do you know what? I learned where it went wrong, took it on the chin, and then pick yourself up. And I think it's an art, not a science. So if you don't take some risks, you're never going to make greatness.
Well, nobody would know better the balance between art and science than yourself, Mark. But I'm sure that there have been some tremendously proud moments. So maybe you want to just share some of what the knockout moments have been for you in your career.
The big moments have been, and not about me actually, about when the team have been recognised for doing brilliant stuff. So, we won a Gold Can award for Gold Lion for Lynx comms. And, that was, we had a ball when I worked on Lynx. It was such a fun brand. But, to be seen and recognised in the industry for doing brilliant work. We did IP effectiveness at Cadbury. We had a night where I think we won 2 awards in the same night, and for lifelong effectiveness. And actually, it's all the hard work that you put in to go. It's recognised beyond customers and the ad on TV. And probably one of the best ones is I won a gold disc for selling records. So we launched again when I was on Lynx. We did a campaign which launched a record, and actually we ended up on Top of the Pops. And from a cool proud mum moment, my kids were just so impressed that we got a gold record because we sold so many records. So Oliver Cheetham, Make Love was the track, and the whole campaign was all about we went to market as if we were launching a record rather than a new variant on Lynx, and actually all of the principles of what that would look like. And we actually launched a track which was on the ad at the time. So it's been when we've been externally recognised for brilliant work that the team have done, because it is a team effort. We're a people business. Marketing is all about people.
So it is possible to be a cool mum. It is possible to be a cool mum.
I've become less cool over time. I think I was probably at my coolest when I worked for Cadbury, because that was it. That car was bringing chocolate home on a regular basis. I lost it a bit when I went fish fingers and peas. And then by the time I get to gas and banking, it's like, no, it's not quite. I'm not in the cool books anymore.
Do you know what? Interesting, and beyond being cool mum, you're certainly an inspiring mum. I've got no doubt about that. But what your example about CDs and songs talk to is the innovativeness that marketers need to put forward and need to really, really break through. And I think that's quite remarkable when you take a different lens on something and then you build on it, and then you can see the impact on the other side. So I'm super example that you've shared with us there, Mark, and a real learning point, I think, for marketers currently out there thinking about creative campaigns. I just want to pause for 1 second because I want to kind of just speak out and shout out to a few people from our community who come on each week, and just really grateful to have your support coming on. Paul, you've got your hand up. So if you want to come on the show, either via voice or video, then just put that in the chat and we'll allow you to ask your question to Mark. But everybody else, by the way, please put some questions in the chat as well. So I just want to say a quick shout out to Agatha, Alistair, Andrea, Anu, nice to see you on. I think it's maybe your first time on here. Barney, of course. Craig, again, great to have you on. Perhaps you'll become a guest at some point. Dario, Hannah, James, John again, Katja. Just so many people coming on week. Lindsay, Lucy, Raju, Ruben, I think it's their second time. Richard, one of our regulars. Hi, Ross. Lovely to see you on. Russ as well. Saffron, Sam, both great to see you. Sarah as well, and Trina as well. So look, thank you very much for coming on and spending some time with us on a Friday morning, hopefully adding some value to you. So Paul, you've got your hand up. Is this an opportunity for you to want to come on and ask Margaret a question? Let's see. Put it into the chat if you want to. I'll ask Mark one more before, if you're feeling a bit shy. So Mark, one of the things is you've talked about mistakes that you made personally. I want to hear a little bit about when your team makes mistakes and the sort of leadership approach that you take to that, given the fact that you kind of, you've had some hollows yourself. How does it happen when someone comes to you and says they've spent a couple of $100,000 and, hey, I'm sorry, we can't use the work? How do you feel about that now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things I really believe in is, we're not solving for world peace. This is not brain surgery. And actually people consciously don't make bad decisions. So if stuff's gone wrong, that's okay. I think, and actually you just need to then look at why, where, how, and how do we learn from it and move on. So, one of my, I generally go into most of my situations, so nothing phases me. I'm going, stuff happens. And that's one of my, it's interesting, when I interview people, the question I always ask, if anyone ever comes for an interview with me, what's your biggest screw up? Always ask people. Because if people say they haven't got one, I'll say, well, you haven't tried hard enough, genuinely. Because actually, if you're not trying to do things differently, you're not trying to push stuff forward, then I sort of go, I don't believe you. You haven't taken risks. I don't think you're ever going to get to greatness. So I'm not fazed by stuff going wrong. If you come a second time and say you're screwed up and you've done the same thing, I would say we need to have a conversation. But, if people get stuff wrong, great. Actually, I think you learn more from getting it wrong than getting it right often. So it's just being able to understand why, where, what went wrong, and what do you take from it, and then what would you do differently next time?
So I can vouch, Mark, for the fact that nothing phases you, because I remember very, very vividly in 2018, we were both judges for the IPA Awards, and I'd spent months reading all the papers. And Mark, you contacted me on the Monday. Bear in mind we were doing the judging on the Thursday, and she said, "Have you started yet?" And I thought, yeah, you're joking. But in fact, you hadn't actually started, and God knows what those next 48 hours were. But it must have been pretty tasty to get ready, because nobody.
I remember that well. You scared the life out of me. I had a box that delivered, because I'm really sad. I need to go tech, but I love a bit of paper, and so I got my PA to print the case studies, and I'd had a box delivered to the house, and it'd been sat in the hall for a while. And then I bumped into you, Mark, and you said, "How are you getting on?" I said, "I haven't started yet." And your face, you literally went. Anyway, I spent 48 hours reading. You'd not be surprised to know. Lots of paper.
Yeah. So obviously you've got a wealth of experience from many sectors. Let's turn to today. How are you putting all that into practice in the challenges you're facing in your current job?
So, there's three things. If you look at our working quarters, and so ultimately, where do I want to be by the end of the year? I would say the first thing for me is team. So what I've learned a lot in the last few jobs I've had is get your team working well. Because actually, I'm also a believer in lazy leadership, because the stronger my team are and the more effective they are, the less I've got to do, and actually the more successful we'll be. So the first thing is I'm putting a lot of work and effort into the team. And it sounds really basic, but, what is marketing here to do? Because in different businesses, what's in and out of marketing? That's the first question. Well, what is marketing? Is different. So getting really clear on what we're there to deliver, what's our mission, actually, and how do we organise to get the work done, and how do we work effectively together? Because we're quite siloed in the way we think about marketing and the end-to-end. So I spent a lot of effort in bringing that into play, my experience around managing end-to-end funnels and all that great stuff. So first and foremost is team, and getting the team working well, and us all aligned about what we're trying to do. The second thing for me is, we have a new purpose in the business. How do we take that and translate that into our brands? So what role are the brands playing? What do we want to stand for? How do we really strengthen our positionings and go to market brilliantly? Because I also believe unless you stand out, you're never going to differentiate. So we've got, banks are not as differentiated as they should and could be. So there's a lot of work going on around brands and branding, and that is, I've done a lot of that before, so that'll fit in. The third bucket is actually, how do I get myself upskilled around the category? Because I do passionately believe to be taken seriously as a marketeer, you have to be able to talk the language of the business. You have to be able to talk pounds and pence and where the money shows up and why marketing is important. And at the moment, I literally feel like I've entered this world of FS. We've got to humanise financial services. We're so critical to the economy, and yet people find it so hard to navigate the category. And as a newbie in, I can absolutely vouch for that. So this year, a real effort to go help me understand the P&L, help me understand, how we make money. How does marketing play into making money? So measurement is really important. And within that, help me understand my customer. Because ultimately, one of my mantras is he who buys your beer on a Friday night is the tune you should dance to. And the person that buys my beer on a Friday night is ultimately our customers. And the more I can understand that and them and what's important and how do we serve them from a marketing perspective, the more effective we'll be. So there's a lot, I've got to learn, but there's a lot I can apply from past jobs that I think actually could get us up that, better output, faster curve. So I'm really excited about the opportunity.
And Marge, you talked about perhaps one of the most fundamental truths about marketing, which is, the need to understand customers in the best way forward. And then, of course, have differentiating solutions to solve that need creatively, I guess. It's sort of related to a bit of a question that Raju in the audience is asking. We've got a couple of questions now that are coming through. So he talks about a paradigm shift and whether you're seeing that. So you talked about a bit about the fundamentals. Do you see that at the other side of the coin, there has been a paradigm shift in marketing, or do you still think that what you've described still holds true today, or what are the changes perhaps that we're seeing as well?
So I think marketing is fundamentally different to when I started too many years ago. If you think of when I was back in the day of brand manager, your biggest thing was get on Coronation Street, centre break. So 7:30, centre break, 90% of eyeballs of the UK. And then you look at what's happened in the world since then. We've digitized, and channels. I mean, now you think of how many channels, and a marketer struggles to get across all of the channels, to be honest, and really understand, because the principle of what we do is right message, right channel, right time. And actually context is as important as content. And I think to be able to manage that now as a marketer is much harder than ever before. I think you look at customer behavior and, now you've got nowhere to hide as a brand. If you think of digital and social and, if you make a mistake, it's public. And actually we kid ourselves if we think otherwise. So the gap between what you say and what you do is disappeared. Brands can't just be all smoke and mirrors on their comms. And then, and I have said many times, I'm not Merlin. I can put the best ad in the world up and the comms in the world. But if when you touch our brand, if the service is rubbish, it falls apart. Because actually customers see it and feel it. So it's got to work. It doesn't work unless it all works. And the big thing I've seen and the biggest shift is data. If you said now, and I've said it in many meetings, my new best friend is the chief technology officer, because actually marketing increasingly, and particularly if I think of a service-led business, we know where our customers live. We know what products and services they take from us. You can append it with all sorts of data. How do we use that to drive much better outcomes and not to stifle creativity, actually to fuel creativity, because it should allow us to be much, much smarter at personalizing, because we know more about you. I'd have killed for that data in FMCG, because the challenge in FMCG is you don't own the relationship with the customer. Actually, the retailer does. And you have to pay lots and lots of money to what was then dunnhumby and Nectar to get any shopper data. Whereas now, actually, your ability to directly target ever much so. So I see a massive shift in marketing. So you need to be commercial, you need to be tech savvy, you need to be curious and interested in your customer, but never forget the core principles of what we do is exactly the same. How do you get great message to your customers in a way that they really resonate with and drive action on the back of it? That's universal, that's the same. The ways in which we need to do that now, massively different from 20 years ago.
So Mark, we've got a few more questions around marketing, but I just want to take a quick detour into leadership and ask you, what do you think is at the heart of your leadership? And maybe what do you think would be the best and worst thing about working for you?
Oh, brilliant question. At the heart, I mean, I massively believe everybody steps in their trousers one leg at a time. So I don't see myself as being any more important than anyone else. I feel like I'm in the luxurious position of, I've got more experience than other people, but sometimes with that comes baggage. So I think one of my real strengths is my job is to make everybody else's job easier. So I am a real believer in servant leadership. I go, how can I help you and how can I make it easier? And that shows up in everything I do. I don't believe in hierarchy. I think everyone has got a point of view. And actually, the more we can build diverse and inclusive teams, the better outcome we'll get. I also have a theory that corporates struggle with real diversity and inclusion because they operate on harmony. So I think you have to work really hard to really drive diverse, inclusive teams, because you need to be happy with conflict and manage, not conflict in I want to fight, but with diversity it becomes different opinions, points of views, ways of thinking about the world, and you've got to get comfortable with that. And I'm comfortable with conflict. Best thing is I genuinely not fazed by anything. I genuinely go, we're not solving for world peace. Actually, we can figure it out. There's a way to do everything. I guess the flip of that is I can be consciously unreasonable. So because I generally think there is a way to do everything, you just got to be able to trade off cost, time and effort. That there is an answer to, there's nothing that you can't get done. You just got to figure out how to do it. And that, I think, drives probably a sense of being a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, because I'll go, there must be a way. There must be, find me a man who can. And but I think I generally go, no one has ever stopped me trying to do something in business. And when I've been challenged, as long as you've got a really good idea or articulation of why you're doing it, 99% of the time you can get on. So I'm not sure we are brave enough or ask enough or push enough.
I just second Trina's comment there about your love and your can-do attitude. It's just absolutely brilliant. And the other thing that I'm certainly coming across in spades is the way that you distill perhaps some complexities and actually make it quite simple. And you even talked about the definition of marketing as being quite a simplistic sort of thing. And I'm alluding to a question that Richard Brown has pitched out at you. To the point of sort of saying that actually, it all seems like common sense, and yet marketers tend to sort of overcomplicate things. So which part of the process do you think marketers most overcomplicate? Perhaps lots of maybe anecdotes from the FS world.
I think we overcomplicate a lot. I mean, I actually think businesses overcomplicate things. I think we forget that we're here to serve customers and not the other way. So I see a lot of what I call product out thinking. So we confuse organizing principle with how we go to market. And that, I think, is where it gets really complex. We have P&L centered around product. Customers buy products and services from brands. And actually, I think our job in marketing is to pivot the customer thinking to pivot the product inputs into customer plans and customer messages. And that's where I think it gets really super complex. I also think we believe our own rhetoric a lot. I've seen lots of examples where we start thinking we are the customer, and we're not. I feel very privileged to have a great job and I live in a house with space, and that's not reflective of our entire base. I used to work on frozen foods. It's CD customers who are struggling to feed their family sometimes, and I think don't ever mistake yourself for your end So I think we complicate everywhere. We complicate in, thinking about who we're selling to, we complicate in process, and we use a language. And that was the thing that struck me when I moved from research into marketing. We use a language that makes everything really complicated. It's really not. So I think it goes on everywhere. But the language of the business and the category, I think, is one of the hardest things for us to address in FS. We need to humanize the category. I think we've made banking as something that's really scary. Same in utilities, kilowatt hours, calorific values. I did a whole piece of work on the bill in utilities. The bill was 7 pages long, loads of technical stuff. And actually, you say to customers, "What do you want?" All they want is, "How much do I owe? Is that number higher or lower than I was expecting? How do I pay?" That is it. And we'd send them 7 sheets of stuff because we thought they were worried about, unit watts and calorific value. And I used to say internally, "I've got a PhD in laser chemistry. I don't know how to calculate calorific value. All I care about is money. Like, how much am I paying?" So I think it happens everywhere. Language, process, systems. Yeah, I think we start believing our own rhetoric.
So it's clear you are a simplifier. And actually, just going to go back one step to something you said, which is, I've never heard anybody say it so crisply, that there is a paradox that organizations operate on harmony. And therefore, there's a paradox around the desire for diversity. But just to build on that, obviously, you've got one of the, I think now 6 female CEOs in the FTSE 100. So there was a 6th that came so this morning in Alison. You're early in your role, but what's your intent around the role that you want to play in terms of diversity inclusion within NatWest?
I am passionate about diversity and inclusion. I'm passionate. I think I genuinely go, unless you bring different perspectives and really harness that. Interestingly, I think inclusion is harder than diversity. I think you can see diversity. I think inclusion is much more implicit in the way things get done around here. So I'm driving hard in my world and sort of 3 levels. So one is within my team. Actually, my problem, interestingly enough, is I haven't got any men. I'm 73% female in the department. It's unusual. Normally I've worked to either more men or 50-50 in marketing, but actually we're very female skewed. So I'm looking hard at, what's the stats on my department, and actually how do I shift that dial? And we've been really ambitious, I think, in setting targets. And if you'd asked me 6 years ago, I'd been really anti-target setting, because I always go, you want to get the job on merit. And, I increasingly think we're not going to shift the dial unless we actually force it into the system and over-index and to drive a different, diversity in populations. I think we've got to work really hard at that. So within the department, looking hard at what that looks like. The other piece is we should be showing up as a modern British brand in modern British society. And actually, when you look at the content we're creating, it's not diverse and inclusive. So how do we shift the dial in generating content that is reflective of the reality of our customer base, but also the reality of our employee base? We're employing thousands of people across the UK who are working in branches. So looking hard now at actually what does that look like? How do we make sure all of the inputs in what we do are driving a diverse output, whether that's from brief writing to talent selection. And then the third bit is within our agencies. We will be looking at our agencies now and saying, what are you doing to address diversity and inclusion? Is my team actually the sort of team that I want working on the business? So, and really championing that internally. I've got a reverse mentor on BAME. Personally, I find it tricky talking, what can you say, what can't you say? So I've got a mentor now who actually is brilliant, because, you can have some great conversations. And I worry even about BAME as a topic, actually, because I think it should be about everyone. We should be thinking hard about it. But I think personally, really working hard to champion it, but also working hard on, how to hold it, how to have conversation, how to have difficult conversations, because I think it's an area where people are a bit wobbly on, what we should or shouldn't do. And part of what we need to do is actually get really curious and start talking about it.
Mark, what's interesting, and clearly just trying to just move on a little bit from the topic, but one thing you mentioned was around the transformation of branches and how actually you need to start looking more carefully at that branch network, the inclusivity around that. And it's actually refreshing for me to hear CMO talk about sort of more kind of customer experience, physical location type of thing, perhaps not the realm of a CMO, 5-10 years ago. So it's great to see that actually you're at center stage in that conversation. There's a really interesting question that's come through from Alistair, perhaps sort of maybe the contrasting sort of branch physical stroke into digital. When he talks about what's the level of expertise that someone like yourself at your level needs to have when it comes to digital. What's your take?
I mean, I don't think you need to know it all, but you certainly need to know enough. And I think the challenge in my role is, and that landscape's changing so quickly. So, I need to be plugged into how it works, how technology underpins what we do. And back to my earlier conversation, we increasingly will be using data and insight to drive action. So, my job is to get brilliant people around me who really know the ins and outs, but actually I need to be smart enough to know what questions to ask. So part of, where I spend my time is help me understand. I don't need to do your job for you, but I do need to understand how it works. So, one of the things I've just done on my leadership team is brought in a MarTech lead, because actually, what I recognised is I don't understand it well enough. I need someone who really does. And actually his job is to upskill me as much as, my job is to make sure we've got money and permission to crack on and sort out what's going on with technology. So I think it's an area where, again, from a marketing perspective, unless you're understanding what's going on in that space, I think you'll struggle. You will struggle because that's the future. And actually, I think we've got to go on a journey. And interesting, I was on a panel in one of the companies last year, and there was a massive debate around who owns customer experience. And the room, and I remember, and I was like, well, it's obvious, it's the CMO. And then someone else on the panel was like, no, it's the CTO. And I was like, the CTO? Anyway, and I remember saying to the room, well, what do you think? And the room was absolutely split on who should own customer experience. Half was CTO, half was CMO. And I remember, and there was a debate, and I left, and I just reflected on it. And I think there's something for me about, if you look at a lot of legacy businesses, which is, a lot of banking, you sat on legacy tech stack. And the biggest issue in those businesses is legacy systems, legacy processes, legacy thinking. And actually the CTO tends to be very much big SAP, mainframe, but driven. Whereas actually, if you think of the neos and, a lot of the startups, they're on, software as a service, integrated stacks. So where actually your customer experience, your product and your brand are much more intertwined. If you think of your Amazons, and the future is, your CTO is going to be playing a much more active role in actually how do we define that experience and how does it show up. And again, as a CMO, and that's why I think a lot of people are taking out CMOs in the business, actually because it's becoming more about the integrated experience, which is enabled through technology, and we've got to get with the program.
So, Mark, we're pretty much out of time. And we're going to run by a couple of minutes though. We do try and honour everybody who asks a question. So we did have one from Gus, which I think we've answered in terms of what's from not having a formal education in marketing, what processes were you able to bust? And I think you've talked a lot about simplifying and common sense. Because we're very fortunate to have Craig on the show, who is going to be a guest in due course. Watch out for that. Craig's asked a really great question, which is maybe let's call it our closing one. So you talk about making banking more human to differentiate to reflect your customer base. So what can we expect from NatWest over the coming months?
So we can expect new brand campaign, and actually, which is all about we're not pivoting, but got much clearer about who we're going to go after. Under 35, so we need to be younger and really thinking about lifetime value. So you can see new brand campaign. Working hard on what that means and looks like across customer experience. So I think brand has not been as prevalent in some of our experience touch points. So how does brand show up in the app, the branches, how do we drive that? And the big thing we will be going hard after is, how do we take our purpose and really drive that into proof points for the brand? So doing a lot of work on what that looks like, what that means. So hopefully you should start to see new way of walking, talking and showing up NatWest in the coming months.
Brilliant. Wow. Well, look, so much to look forward to and such an exciting time for you personally, Mark, and what a learning curve I'm sure you're going to be going on in a couple of months. Let's hope that you start to get to meet your team a bit more face to face in the next couple of months as well. Pretty amazing that you've actually been able to go through that process, land what is a dream job through 9 interviews, may I say, add an amazing assessment, but all through virtual. So goes to show it certainly can be done. But Marge, look, it's for us just to say a really warm thank you for your time this morning. It has been absolutely incredible. A couple of key things that have resonated with me. One, certain humble beginnings, right from Sunderland. I spent a lot of my time in Carlisle, so I kind of relate to a lot of where you're coming from. But then being able to kind of jump from laser chemistry into an R&D function, into marketing, and then literally soar up that ranking all the way through to get to the heights you are today. I mean, truly inspiring in so many ways, but not without taking risks, not without being creative, not without really being sort of, not letting anything faze you as you go through that process. Mark, really just want to say a really warm thank you. And I'm sure, our audience have taken a lot from this morning session as well. I'm really looking forward to you being one of our mentors on the Mentoring Gen Z program as well, where you can help inspire other young people too. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also for me, thanks Richie, a couple of reflections from me. So some of the things that have stuck with me, you recognise yourself as a servant leader. You talk a lot about common sense. I love the term lazy leadership. I think that's a good one. I think I take the meaning. I know you don't really mean that, but I take the meaning. We need to talk the language of the business, but perhaps most of all, nothing phases you. And to be honest with you, Mark, it's been a pleasure just to sort of see you smile for the last 40 minutes or so. You've got a lovely smile. So thank you very much for being on the show. It's been an inspiration and a pleasure. And on behalf of all our guests, it's been wonderful to have you here. Just as a final note, for next week, 8 a.m. UK time, we've got Jack Green coming on. Jack is our first Olympian. We've had lots of great people like Mark. We've had some MBEs, OBEs. Jack's our first Olympian. He's actually a double Olympian, both Rio and London. He's after representing Great Britain for many years, and he has moved into the corporate well-being space. It all sounds amazing, but as is the case with many of our guests, it hasn't been a bed of roses. Jack talks very openly about his battles with mental health challenges and its impact upon his performance and life. So that's going to be a fascinating insight into the trials and tribulations of being a successful Olympian. So please join us next week. But until then, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you all very soon. Thanks for joining.